Every doctor in the trauma ward looked at the new nurse, Mrs. Gable, and saw a relic that didn't belong in a modern ER. They laughed behind her back, calling her the turtle because she moved with a slow, deliberate pace that they mistook for being tired or out of touch. They had no idea that her calm was actually the stillness of a storm that had seen things their textbooks couldn't even describe. Subscribe now and drop a comment below. Have you ever been completely underestimated by people who thought they were smarter than you? Stick around, because these doctors were about to get a lesson in humility they would never forget. The hospital was a high-tech maze of glass and steel, a place where the young residents felt like gods because they could navigate a tablet faster than a patient's chart. Mrs. Gable didn't fit that world. She wore old-school white scrubs that were pressed so sharp you could cut paper on the creases. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, practical bun, and her eyes stayed low, focused on the task at hand. When the young surgeons sprinted past her, their sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, she simply stepped aside, her expression unreadable. Dr. Aris, a 30-year-old hotshot who thought he was the next great gift to medicine, was the worst of them. He'd roll his eyes when he saw her double-checking the manual drip rates or taking a manual blood pressure reading. He thought she was a dinosaur, a diversity hire for the sake of seniority, someone to be tolerated until she finally decided to retire to a porch swing somewhere. It was a Tuesday night when the air in the ER changed. You could feel it before the sirens even started. It wasn't the usual city chaos. It was something heavier. When the radio clicked over, the dispatcher's voice was tight. Multiple gunshot wounds, massive internal trauma, and a high-priority escort. 3 black SUVs roared into the ambulance bay seconds before the sirens reached a crescendo. Men in tactical gear, faces covered in dust and sweat, jumped out before the vehicles even fully stopped. In the center of it all was a man on a gurney, his chest a map of red, his breathing coming in ragged, wet gasps. This wasn't a car accident. This was a war zone brought to the city. Dr. Aris and the other residents scrambled. The trauma bay became a hive of panicked energy. They were shouting for monitors, calling for blood, their hands shaking as they tried to find a vein in a man whose body was shutting down from shock. The patient was a giant of a man, his arms covered in tattoos of anchors and tridents, but his face was turning a ghostly shade of gray. The machine started screaming, that long, flat tone that means the heart has given up. Aris was yelling, his voice cracking, demanding more adrenaline, more power on the paddles. He was losing control of the room, and he knew it. The chaos was winning. That's when Mrs. Gable moved. She didn't run. She glided. She stepped into the center of the storm and placed a hand on Dr. Aris's arm. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was an anchor. She didn't say a word, but the look in her eyes stopped the blood in his veins. She moved him aside like he was a child playing in the way. Without looking, her hand reached out, and a junior nurse placed a scalpel in it. Not because she asked, but because her presence demanded it. She didn't look at the monitors. She looked at the man. She felt the tension in his chest, the way his lungs were struggling against trapped air. While the doctors were staring at screens, she was reading the human body like a map she had walked 1,000 times. She performed a needle decompression with a precision that was terrifying to watch. The hiss of escaping air was the only sound in the room as the man's chest finally rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Her hands were rock steady, even as the patient's blood stained her pristine white sleeves. She wasn't the slow nurse anymore. She was a surgeon of the shadows, a woman who operated with a cold, calculated efficiency that made the residents look like amateurs. She stayed over the man for 40 minutes, her fingers dancing through the mess of his injuries, tying off bleeders and stabilizing his vitals with moves that weren't in any modern manual. When the man was finally stable enough to move to surgery, the room was silent. Mrs. Gable stepped back, wiped her hands on a towel, and checked her watch. She went back to her station and began filling out the paperwork as if nothing had happened. The next morning, the hospital was buzzing. The word had come down that the man they saved wasn't just anyone. He was a commander in the Navy SEALs, a man whose life was worth more to the government than the entire hospital building. Dr. Aris was trying to take credit, telling the chief of staff how he managed the scene. But he stopped talking when he saw the commander's team standing outside the room. They weren't looking for a doctor. They were standing in two perfect rows, their backs straight, their eyes fixed on the hallway. Mrs. Gable walked down that hallway with her tray of meds. She didn't look up, didn't seek attention. But as she approached the commander's room, the giant men in tactical gear, men who looked like they could break a person with 2 fingers, all snapped to attention. They didn't just move. They stood with a level of respect that bordered on worship. The commander, despite the tubes and the bandages covering half his torso, struggled to sit up. His eyes found Mrs. Gable. He didn't see an old nurse. He saw the woman who had pulled him out of the dirt in a place far away, years before this hospital even existed. The commander raised a shaking hand to his brow in a slow, perfect salute. "Colonel Gable," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought you retired." Mrs. Gable didn't smile, but her eyes softened. She returned the salute with a sharp, practiced motion that looked more natural on her than a stethoscope ever did. "I got bored, Commander," she said quietly. "And it seems you still haven't learned how to duck." The doctors stood in the hallway, their mouths open, realizing that the woman they had mocked for being slow was a retired military medical commander who had more combat experience than all of them combined. She hadn't been slow. She had been waiting for them to catch up. She didn't need their respect, because she already had the respect of the bravest men on Earth. Watch this video next to see why you should never judge a book by its cover.